Now, the rest of the story. Yet again, Avrom returned to his bedridden wife to kiss her goodbye. "I still wish you could come with me," he said tenderly, and she wished that she could too. Of course, Dr. Kennemer had forbidden it. Rose's fever was too high, he had said. Travel even in comfort would be too stressful for her, he said. So yet again, and it was the fifth time now, 48-year-old Avrom Goldbogen returned to the bedside of his beloved Rose, to kiss her, to squeeze her hand, to remind her, "Without you, I'd feel like half a pair of scissors." Picturing that made Rose laugh. Yes, she agreed that's probably how she would feel as well. So she leaned forward, pulling the covers aside. "Just give me a moment to get dressed," she said. But if Rose's illness grew worse, Avrom would never forgive himself, he protested. Rose smiled. "Remember what we promised right after we married," she said. "Our golden rule, remember, whither thou goest, I will go, so I'm going with you." Avrom smiled back at her. "Oh, no," he said. "I'm staying." And he took off his coat. "They can give the award to somebody else," he said. "I got what I want right here." And Rose sank back into her pillow. "But it is your award," she insisted. "You earned it. You should go. You should accept it." The bedroom window flickered white as the lightning flashed and a crack of thunder came roaring in behind it. At once Rose was transported back to the evening of their wedding day. Avrom had arranged for a fireworks display in which their initials appeared in glowing letters in the sky. It was a thoughtful, romantic gesture. But as the letters inevitably fell to earth in a shower of sparks, Rose began trembling and even cried out in fear. Why had she reacted that way, she wondered. And now she wondered yet again as the storm clouds gathered outside her window. But now Avrom had put his coat on again, and he was standing in the bedroom doorway once more. "I'll call you at every stop along the way," he promised. And he was gone forever. It would take more than a year for the Civil Aeronautics Board to issue its report. Bottom line, the Lockheed Lodestar weighed a ton more than it should have taking off, started icing up, then lost an engine, and the flight that ought to have ended safely in New York ended instead in a snowy valley in New Mexico. The charred body of Avrom Hirsch Goldbogen was returned to his sweetheart, identifiable only by the money clip he was carrying, and thus, in fire and ice, was extinguished the life of a theatrical producer on his way to be honored as the showman of the year, a man you remember by another name, a name he chose for himself. And accompanying him on the flight that nobody survived to describe was his biographer, Art Kahn, who had just completed The 9 Lives of Mike Todd. Strange how threatened from time to time throughout his life by illnesses, many of them desperate ones, Mike's 26-year-old widow at one time only could have been spared by one. Half a pair of scissors named Rose, Elizabeth Rosemond Taylor. That's right, Liz Taylor. Mike Todd had christened his ill-fated private airplane the Lucky Liz. Only now you know that was not at all so, because now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. Avrom Hirsch Goldbogen was born on June the 22nd, 1909, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but the world knew Avrom as Michael or Mike Todd. Now, Mike was from a poor family. He worked his way up from a soda jerk, security guard, and shoe salesman to owning a construction company and opening the College of Bricklaying in America. While working construction, Mike took jobs soundproofing production stages when they began to transition from silent films to talkies. That's what films with sound were called at the time, talkies. During the Century of Progress exposition in Chicago, that's 1933 and 1934, Mike produced an attraction called the Flame Dance. Mike designed and built an elaborate system of gas jets which, at the right moment during the dance, ignited part of the dancer's costume and left her apparently naked. It worked perfectly and attracted attention from all over the world. Of course it did. This opened the door to Mike becoming a film producer. Now, let's fast forward a couple of decades. By the mid-50s, Mike was a world-famous producer. In October 1956, Michael Todd's Around the World in 80 Days debuted in theaters. Within a year, it had earned more than 5 times its $6 million budget. On February the 2nd, 1957, Mike married Elizabeth Taylor in Acapulco, Mexico. Mike was 49 years old and Elizabeth Taylor was just 24. It was the third marriage for both Mike and Elizabeth. On August 6, 1957, Elizabeth Taylor gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Elizabeth Frances, they called her Liza, Todd. On March 21, 1958, Mike rated himself to fly to New York to accept the New York Friars Club Showman of the Year Award. Elizabeth Taylor wanted to travel with him, but was forced to stay home with a cold, just as Mr. Harvey explained. Mike called his next-door neighbor, Kirk Douglas. Yes, that Kirk Douglas, and asked him to accompany him on the flight. Kirk Douglas said, "Mike asked me to go on his private plane with him, and we were going to stop and see Harry Truman and then go on to New York. I was very excited." Kirk said, "When I told my wife, Ann, about the plane ride, she said, 'I don't want you to go.' And we had a big argument." Kirk Douglas stayed home. At 10:41 that Friday night, Mike Todd, his biographer Art Kahn, 42-year-old pilot Bill Werner, and 36-year-old co-pilot Tom Barclay boarded Mike's twin-engine Lockheed Lodestar Model 18-56 airplane similar to the one behind me and left Burbank, California. They were scheduled to make a stopover for fuel in Tulsa, Oklahoma before continuing on to New York. The plane encountered moderate icing at 11,000 feet, and the pilot requested approval from the Civil Aeronautics Administration stationed at Zuni to change altitude to 13,000 feet. Now, the ceiling, or the highest altitude at which this plane could safely fly, was 13,500 feet. Permission was granted. The pilot radioed when they reached 13,000 feet. That was the last anyone heard from Mike Todd's plane. At 2:05 a.m., Dick Lane, operator at the Grants Airport in Grants, New Mexico, about halfway between Burbank and Tulsa and about 50 miles east of Zuni, saw a big flash of light southwest of the airport. Dick immediately contacted the CAA. At daybreak on the following morning, March 22nd, CAA agent John Johnson and observer Bill Hopwood took off in a light plane to see if they could find the source of the flash. About 20 miles southwest of Grants, through fog, the observer saw a wisp of smoke rising from a small valley between cloud-shrouded mountains. Johnson circled and saw that the plane was totally destroyed and there were no signs of life. Johnson said, "The outer portions of the wings and a small portion of the tail was all that was left. The bodies of the pilots and passengers were burned so badly in the crash that dental records were the only means by which officials identified them." Now, Kirk Douglas was still mad at his wife the following morning. Kirk said in an interview, "We were driving and not talking to each other, so we turned on the radio. When the radio clicked on, an announcer relayed the news that Mike's private plane, the Lucky Liz, had crashed and killed everyone on board. When Kirk Douglas heard the news, he and his wife pulled the car over to the side of the road because they were in shock. In a People magazine interview in 2015, Kirk Douglas said, "Why was I spared? I was so grateful. My wife has saved me many times." Michael Todd, Avrom Hirsch Goldbogen's remains were buried in Waldheim Cemetery in Forest Park, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, in late March 1958. But what caused the crash? In April 1959, a year after the crash, the CAA released the findings from their investigation. But they found that it was a multifaceted problem. In January 1958, 2 additional fuel tanks, which held 77 gallons each, were mounted in the number 4 baggage compartment. The maximum certified takeoff weight for this airplane, not including passengers, was 18,605 pounds. With the additional weight of the fuel, and not counting the weight of the 4 people in the airplane, they were at least 2,152 pounds overweight when they took off. While flying at 11,000 feet, the plane's wings began to ice up, which added weight to the airplane. Now, the master rod bearing failed on the right engine. The right engine was completely disabled. The pilot feathered the engine, which means that he tilted the blade. Now, see, the blades on an airplane are tilted like this. But when you feather an airplane, you turn them like this to reduce the drag. But the one remaining engine was unable to produce enough power to keep the airplane under control. The airplane stalled and fell from the sky. The crash killed all aboard. Now, if you want to read the entire crash report for yourself, it's just a couple of pages. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. You know how we say rest in peace when someone dies? Well, some people would not let Michael Todd rest in peace. Michael Todd had rested in peace for 19 years. But early Sunday morning, June 25, 1977, grave robbers dug a 4.5-foot hole to the vault, pried open the bronze casket, and smashed through a protective glass bubble to gain access to the rubber bag which held the charred remains of Michael Todd. They removed the bag containing Michael Todd's remains from the grave. Police searched the surrounding area but were unable to find his remains. An anonymous caller gave a tip to a Chicago private investigator who passed the information on to police. Based on this tip, officers went to the open grave and walked 75 yards due south. There, underneath a large tree, was a plastic bag which had been covered with dirt, leaves, and tree branches. This area had been searched, but searchers missed it because of the manner in which the bag containing his remains had been disguised. It was perfect. When investigators opened the bag, they found the charred remains of whom they believed was Michael Todd. Also in the bag was a charred safety belt buckle similar to the type used in airplanes. Based on the information of the tipsters, police suspected the thieves broke into the grave in hopes of stealing a $100,000 10-carat diamond ring given to Michael Todd by Elizabeth Taylor. Now, this was a $100,000 valued ring from 1950s. Apparently, the grave robbers didn't know his body was burned beyond recognition and thought the family had buried him with the ring on his finger. Michael Todd Jr. told police, "Absolutely nothing of value was placed in that bag, but to a warped individual, the lure of such a ring might be a motive." Other than the shock of what they were doing, the grave robbers had little fear of legal repercussions. According to the laws of the state of Chicago at the time, the crime of body snatching was a misdemeanor punishable by a fine of between $5 and $100. To keep this from happening again, the family had Mike Todd's remains buried in a new location which has never been revealed. Hopefully, Mike Todd will now rest in peace for all eternity. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And now you know the rest of the story.